The morning of September 18, 1944, dawned on Peleliu Island like a furnace turned up to its limit. The volcanic ridges stretched endlessly, jagged and black, baking under a sun that seemed to burn through the very air. The ground itself was hostile, made of sharp rocks and hardened lava, each step threatening to tear flesh or trip the unwary. Smoke and ash swirled from distant explosions, mixing with the metallic tang of blood that had soaked the earth over weeks of relentless fighting. Jackson's regiment had already suffered nearly 70% casualties. Friends, comrades, brothers in arms, gone in flashes of fire and smoke, leaving a hollow silence behind them. There were no tanks, no artillery, no backup. Every advance was a gamble, every moment a test of courage, skill, and sheer luck. The Japanese defenders were everywhere, dug in, invisible until the muzzle flash betrayed them, fortified inside concrete pillboxes that bristled with machine guns, waiting to cut down anyone foolish enough to come close. Jackson was 19 years old. A boy on the edge of manhood, yet forged into a Marine by training and necessity. He had learned the rhythms of combat in brutal lessons, but nothing could have prepared him for this day, for this hellish landscape, for the impossible situation he now faced. Crawling across the volcanic rubble, every movement measured, he could feel the heat of the rock through the thin soles of his boots, could taste the ash and smoke in his lungs, could hear the screams of the wounded and dying. It was a symphony of chaos, and he was trapped in the eye of it. Each step forward could be his last, each breath a borrowed gift. Then the unthinkable happened. He was surrounded. 54 armed Japanese soldiers encircled him, closing the noose tight. Hands bound behind his back, knees pressed into the volcanic rock, Jackson faced the cold steel of a Japanese officer's blade at his throat. He could see the determination in their eyes, the belief that his life was already over. Most men in that position would have shut their eyes, waited for the inevitable, and accepted the end. But Jackson did not. Time seemed to stretch in that moment. The heat pressing down on him became oppressive. The noise of distant artillery and nearby gunfire faded to a dull roar, and all that remained was the immediate, tangible weight of death. He felt it in the pressure of the blade, in the watching eyes of dozens of soldiers, in the knowledge that one false move could be his last. Yet, paradoxically, he felt something else: clarity. In the face of absolute danger, his mind sharpened. Every instinct, every lesson, every moment of training came together. He assessed, calculated, measured his options. Even with hands bound, even surrounded by overwhelming numbers, even staring at execution, he looked for the tiniest gap, the smallest opportunity. The volcanic ridges that had seemed like a trap now appeared as a map. Every rise and shadow a potential tool. He could sense where the enemy's fire was strongest, where their lines were weak. He felt the weight of his Browning automatic rifle strapped to his back, 19 pounds of cold steel and loaded potential, and he imagined the way it could speak if he could only free it. His heart pounded, but not with fear, with determination, with defiance. Most people call it courage. Jackson called it survival, yes, but survival with a purpose, to turn the impossible into a chance. He did not wait for mercy. He did not plead. He did not flinch. Instead, he began to move in his mind, tracing paths across the battlefield, planning in seconds the actions he would take once he could reach his rifle, once he could strike. He imagined the pillboxes, the ventilation shafts, the hidden tunnels. Every concrete fortress was a challenge, every enemy soldier a problem to solve. And in that moment, kneeling on the scorched volcanic rock, he made a decision that would become legend. He would not die kneeling. He would rise, he would fight, he would survive long enough to change the tide. Even as the officer's blade pressed against his throat, Jackson's mind raced faster than his fear. He calculated trajectories, angles of fire, escape routes. He visualized the assault he would launch, the sprint across open ground, the use of his environment to gain an advantage. He imagined the fire of his rifle cutting through the enemy, each shot deliberate, each movement precise. He imagined himself outnumbered, outgunned, yet unbroken. Around him, the Japanese soldiers felt the shift, even if they did not understand it. The presence of a man who refused to die, who refused to be a statistic, radiates a force of its own. And for a brief moment, the encirclement that had seemed absolute began to feel breakable. Jackson's breathing slowed, even as his body tensed. The volcanic heat burned, the cries of battle surged, and still he prepared. Not as a boy, not as a prisoner, but as a Marine standing on the brink of impossible action. Every sense was alive: sight, sound, smell, touch, every instinct tuned to survival and victory. He had no backup, no plan B, no reinforcements. He had only the next moment, the next breath, the next heartbeat. And in that crucible, he transformed fear into clarity, desperation into strategy, hopelessness into resolve. He had 7 minutes to live, and he was going to use every one of them to write a story the world would never forget. The volcanic ridges, once a tomb, became the stage for defiance. The smoke and fire, once a curtain of death, became cover for survival. And the young Marine, kneeling, hands bound, blade at his throat, became more than a man. He became a force that refused to be contained, a single point of human will standing against 54 armed soldiers, ready to turn the impossible into reality. The world thought he was finished. Jackson knew he was just beginning. The moment Jackson rose from the volcanic rock, the world shifted around him. The Japanese soldiers had counted him dead, a boy on his knees awaiting execution, yet here he was, moving with precision and purpose. He grabbed his Browning automatic rifle, its 19 pounds of steel suddenly an extension of his own body, and felt the rhythm of battle flow into him. Every nerve, every muscle, every heartbeat focused on one objective: survive and strike. The encirclement that had seemed absolute moments ago was no longer a cage, it was a map of opportunity. He could see the enemy's positions, their firing angles, their blind spots. Each concrete pillbox that had loomed like a fortress was now a problem to solve, a target to neutralize. Jackson's first step forward was into open ground, a stretch of volcanic rubble and jagged stone that seemed designed to expose him to every enemy gun in the area. His boots crunched across the hardened lava, each movement deliberate. He ran not in panic, but with intent, lowering his body, using the dips and rises in the terrain as cover. The first pillbox loomed ahead, its steel gun ports glinting in the sun. He could hear the machine guns inside click and ratchet as the soldiers prepared to unleash death. Most men would have frozen. Jackson sprinted. He raised the Browning, hip-fired with precision, and the first pillbox erupted in fire and smoke. He didn't pause. There was no time to admire victory. The second pillbox fired in retaliation. Bullets tore through the air around him, some chipping rocks beneath his feet, some grazing the edges of his uniform. He kept moving, every step measured, every shot calculated. The volcanic terrain forced him to adjust constantly. Dips, ridges, smoke, and fire all blended into a deadly obstacle course. He had no artillery, no cover, no reinforcements. It was just him and the enemy, and his skill and the will to survive. He sprinted across the open ground, a blur of determination, firing at every enemy position he could see. As he reached the third pillbox, Jackson noticed a faint plume of smoke coming from a ventilation shaft. The Japanese had fortified the line with interconnected bunkers and tunnels, and this shaft was a weak point. He shifted tactics, using the shaft as an entry point to surprise the soldiers inside. Bullets whizzed past, but he pressed on, slipping inside and emerged behind the defenders who had assumed he would come only from the front. In a matter of moments, the pillbox was silent.
The ventilation shaft had become the key to breaking the defensive line. Jackson paused only long enough to reload, to scan, to breathe, and then pressed forward. He moved from pillbox to pillbox with relentless momentum, exploiting the enemy's assumptions and the terrain's hidden advantages. Each bunker he cleared revealed the tunnel networks that connected the Japanese positions. Alone, he navigated the labyrinth, grenades in hand, his rifle ready. He neutralized soldiers hiding in corners, forcing surrenders when possible, eliminating threats when necessary. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and the acrid scent of gunpowder. Every step forward was a step deeper into the teeth of the enemy's defenses, and yet Jackson advanced. The impossible was becoming possible. Then came the counterattacks. The Japanese regrouped, rushing to plug the gaps, to repel the Marine who had become a ghost moving through their positions. Jackson found himself alone against multiple soldiers, yet his training, his focus, and his will kept him alive. He fired, he ducked, he rolled, and he used the terrain to his advantage. Each encounter tested his speed, his reflexes, and his courage. He ran low on ammunition, but he refused to stop. He could feel exhaustion creeping into his muscles, sweat stinging his eyes, and the volcanic heat threatening to sap his strength, but there was no pause. Every moment he survived was a victory in itself. As the smoke cleared from the first series of pillboxes, Jackson paused only to catch his breath and assess the next phase. He was wounded, weary, and burning with heat, yet his mind remained sharp. The volcanic ridges had already taken so much from him, but they had also revealed the weaknesses of the enemy. Each concrete fortress that had seemed impenetrable now appeared vulnerable. He knew the fight was far from over. More pillboxes awaited. More soldiers would have to fall if the Marines were to reach the Peleliu airfield. But Jackson had learned something crucial. The impossible could be challenged, and when courage and skill met, miracles became reality. And so he pressed forward, sprinting across the open volcanic ground, his rifle firing with deadly precision, every heartbeat a drumbeat of defiance. 7 minutes had passed, and Jackson was still alive. More than alive, he was the single point of unstoppable force standing between the Japanese defenses and the airfield that the Marines needed so desperately. The first phase of his assault was complete, but the battle was only beginning.
The volcanic ridges of Peleliu stretched before Jackson like a blackened maze of death and fire. Every ridge, every jagged rock, every crumbling wall hid a threat. But Jackson had a rhythm now, a map in his mind of the enemy's defenses. The ventilation shaft he had discovered earlier had broken the Japanese defensive line, giving him a path to strike at multiple pillboxes from unexpected angles. Alone, he moved like a shadow across the volcanic rubble, his Browning automatic rifle ready, every step deliberate, every breath calculated. The first pillbox he approached was already silent, but beyond it the Japanese regrouped. Soldiers peeked from firing ports, their heads cocked in disbelief as the lone Marine advanced. Jackson didn't hesitate. He fired in short, controlled bursts, hip-firing to keep moving, to stay unpredictable. Every shot was measured, every movement designed to exploit the terrain and their overconfidence. The pillboxes were made of reinforced concrete, each one a fortress designed to stop entire squads, yet Jackson moved past them as if the rules of warfare didn't apply to him. He crawled through the volcanic ash, using depressions in the ground for cover. Grenades in hand, he tossed them into the bunkers, clearing soldiers trapped inside tunnels and interconnected networks. The enemy had built a labyrinth beneath the pillboxes, a maze of tunnels designed to allow defenders to flank and strike from unexpected directions. Jackson entered one of the shafts, navigating it alone, feeling the cool, stale air contrast with the blistering heat above. Each tunnel was a test of nerves. A single misstep could trigger a trap or an ambush. But Jackson moved with focus, clearing each passage with precision, eliminating every threat. Above ground, machine gun fire cracked and spat in all directions. Soldiers inside the remaining pillboxes attempted to cover the tunnels, but Jackson had already calculated their positions. He used the volcanic ridges as natural cover, popping up only to fire at openings, then dropping low before they could react. Smoke and dust filled the air, mixing with the scent of gunpowder and scorched earth. Each pillbox fell one by one, the defenders unable to respond effectively to a Marine who defied expectation, speed, and logic. He discovered another ventilation shaft leading deeper into the Japanese lines. Through it, he moved silently, emerging behind a reinforced bunker that had been a thorn in the side of his regiment for days. Soldiers inside were taken completely by surprise. Jackson fired with deadly efficiency, clearing the bunker in seconds, neutralizing threats that had seemed untouchable from the outside. One by one, the interconnected pillboxes and tunnels fell into silence. The Marine Corps had considered such a feat mathematically impossible. Jackson didn't care about numbers. He cared only about survival and victory. The counterattacks came faster now. The Japanese had realized that a single man was tearing through their defenses and tried to regroup. Soldiers emerged from tunnels, attempting to flank, attempting to ambush. Jackson met them head-on. His rifle barked in rapid succession, each shot finding its mark, each movement keeping him one step ahead of overwhelming odds. The volcanic heat beat down on him, sweat stinging his eyes, but he pressed on. Adrenaline sharpened his focus, numbing the pain of exhaustion and the cuts from jagged rock. He moved with the instinct of a predator and the precision of a trained soldier. By now, Jackson had cleared more than half of the pillboxes in his sector. The ventilation shafts and tunnels he discovered became critical to his strategy, allowing him to attack from angles the enemy had not anticipated. He sprinted across open ground when necessary, his rifle firing in controlled bursts, and slipped into shadows when cover presented itself. Each encounter added to the legend, the impossible becoming reality. 54 soldiers, armed and dug in, were neutralized by a single Marine who refused to die, refused to stop, refused to surrender. The heat was unbearable. The volcanic rocks beneath him radiated a relentless fire, and his uniform was soaked in sweat, dust, and blood. Yet Jackson's mind remained sharper than ever. He anticipated movements, predicted counterattacks, and adapted on the fly. The tunnels that once seemed dangerous became conduits of opportunity. He could emerge behind a bunker, silence it, and vanish into the volcanic landscape before the enemy knew where the threat had come from. Each pillbox destroyed brought him closer to the goal, breaking the Japanese defensive line entirely, opening the way for the Marines to advance. By the time he reached the final series of pillboxes in this phase, Jackson's actions had already become almost supernatural in the eyes of the enemy. They had expected one more casualty, another young Marine to kneel and die. Instead, they faced a force moving with unmatched speed, precision, and determination. The tunnels, ventilation shafts, and pillboxes, all designed to stop the Marines, had failed against one determined soldier. Every step, every shot, every decision had been made under extreme pressure, yet executed with perfection. Finally, Jackson paused for a moment to catch his breath, assessing the terrain and the remaining enemy positions. He was alone, isolated, and yet undefeated. The volcanic ridges had taken so much from him, the heat, the injuries, the exhaustion, but they had also given him the advantage. From these heights, he could see the remaining fortifications, the enemy soldiers still attempting to regroup, and the path forward to the Peleliu airfield. He had done what no one believed possible, clearing tunnels, pillboxes, and fortified positions alone. But he knew this was only part of the battle. The final defenses still stood, and the last stretch across open volcanic ground would demand every ounce of skill, courage, and determination he had left. Alone, wounded, exhausted, but unbroken, Jackson prepared for the next phase. The impossible had become possible, but the fight was far from over. The ventilation shafts, the tunnels, the pillboxes, all had fallen to his determination and skill. The Japanese defenders had underestimated him at every turn, and the price of that miscalculation would be written in the silence of the bunkers and tunnels he had cleared. He was not just surviving, he was dominating, a single Marine rewriting the rules of engagement, proving that courage and precision could defy the brutal odds.
The air was thick with smoke and dust, the volcanic ridges glowing under the relentless sun as Jackson realized the Japanese were regrouping for a counterattack. The first wave had been scattered by his relentless assault, but now they surged, trying to reclaim lost ground, trying to plug the gaps he had created. He was alone. No squad mates, no artillery, no tanks. Just him, his Browning automatic rifle, and the unyielding volcanic terrain. The weight of exhaustion pressed on him, his muscles burning, his lungs searing with every inhale, yet there was no time to pause, no time to think beyond the immediate survival and objective. The Marines needed the Peleliu airfield, and the path was blocked by the last enemy strongholds. Bullets tore through the air around him, snapping against the rocks, thudding into the volcanic soil. Each pillbox he had cleared earlier now seemed like a distant battlefield. The danger had returned with renewed intensity. Jackson dropped into the shallow dip of a ridge, scanning for movement. He saw them emerging from the tunnels, soldiers regrouping, advancing with the intent to overwhelm. He fired, each shot deliberate, each pull of the trigger a calculation of distance, angle, and timing. He had only one magazine left, one magazine to hold the line, to survive, to give the Marines a chance. Every bullet counted, and he made them count. The counterattack hit with ferocity. Soldiers came from multiple directions, attempting to flank him, trying to exploit what they thought were weaknesses in a young Marine alone. Jackson moved instinctively, rolling across the volcanic rock, keeping his body low, using the ridges and dips as cover. Smoke from burning pillboxes swirled around him, providing momentary concealment. He fired rapidly, each shot precise, each movement calculated to maintain distance and minimize exposure. The enemy's confidence faltered as they realized the boy they had assumed kneeling moments ago was now an unstoppable force. Sweat ran into his eyes, stung by the ash and grit in the air. Every muscle ached, his back burned from the weight of the rifle, his legs screamed from the constant sprinting, ducking, and rolling across jagged rock. The heat of the volcanic ridges pressed down on him like a physical weight, yet his mind remained razor-sharp. Jackson assessed every threat, every bunker, every enemy soldier. He knew that the counterattack would not last forever, that exhaustion could be leveraged, and that the terrain was both enemy and ally. He made snap decisions, using small rises in the ground to hide, then emerging to fire bursts into enemy positions. His last magazine was a lifeline, and he used it with surgical precision. Minutes stretched like hours as the counterattack raged. Jackson crawled forward, his rifle spitting fire, clearing pockets of resistance in his path. He was methodical yet relentless, a force of one moving through chaos. The Japanese defenders had assumed numerical superiority would guarantee victory, but Jackson was rewriting the rules. Each fallen enemy, each silenced pillbox was a testament to his skill, courage, and determination. He was alone, but every calculated movement, every controlled burst of fire was proof that a single man could defy expectation. Finally, the counterattack began to break. Soldiers who had been advancing hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their actions. Jackson exploited the hesitation, using the terrain to maneuver closer to the last three pillboxes standing between him and the Peleliu airfield. The ground was blistering, the rocks radiating heat that made every crawl agonizing. He had no backup, no cover, and the enemy still had the advantage in numbers and fortified positions. But Jackson had something stronger, unyielding resolve, and the advantage of surprise. He moved silently at first, then sprang into action, using the volcanic dips and shadows to approach undetected. The first of the 3 final bunkers loomed ahead, concrete and steel, seemingly impenetrable. Jackson fired in short, controlled bursts, suppressing the defenders while he maneuvered into a better position. The ventilation shaft he had spotted earlier provided an opportunity. He slipped inside, emerging behind the bunker, and fired into the surprised soldiers. The pillbox erupted in smoke and chaos. He didn't pause. The second bunker awaited, connected by shallow trenches and volcanic ridges. He sprinted across the open ground, bullets whipping past him, his body burning with exertion and heat. Using his knowledge of angles, he targeted enemy positions that would allow him to neutralize threats efficiently. The final bunker was the last obstacle. It had been a thorn in the side of the Marines for days, a stronghold that no small unit could take without heavy casualties. Jackson approached with a combination of caution and aggression. He crawled low, staying below the line of sight of machine guns, feeling every crack in the volcanic rock beneath him. He fired when necessary, using his remaining ammunition with precision. The soldiers inside were caught off guard. They had never imagined a single Marine could reach them. In a blur of movement, he cleared the bunker, eliminating the last resistance and securing the line. The path to the airfield was open. For the first time, Jackson allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. The volcanic heat, the smoke, the debris, and the acrid smell of gunpowder surrounded him. He was battered, bloodied, and exhausted beyond imagination, but he had done it. 54 soldiers, 12 reinforced pillboxes, countless tunnels and ventilation shafts, all cleared by one young Marine. The counterattack had been held, the last 3 pillboxes silenced, and the path forward secured. Jackson's courage and determination had turned a near-certain death sentence into a triumph that would echo through history. He crawled across the volcanic rock, his body burning from the exertion and the heat, but his mind clear. Every muscle ached, every breath burned, yet he had survived what no one thought possible. The impossible mathematics of war had been defied, rewritten by a single Marine who refused to die, refused to surrender, and refused to stop fighting until the objective was achieved. The Peleliu airfield was now within reach, and the Marines could advance. Jackson had not just survived, he had dominated, proving that courage, skill, and determination could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. Even as he finally paused, surveying the volcanic battlefield he had traversed alone, he knew the story of this day would not end with the battle. There were secrets, untold truths, and a legacy that would endure beyond Peleliu, beyond medals, beyond recognition. But in this moment, on the scorched volcanic ridges, he was the last line, the lone force that had turned despair into triumph, proving that one man, with nothing left to lose, could change the course of history.
The battle for Peleliu was over, but the story of Arthur Jackson was far from finished. The volcanic ridges were silent now, the pillboxes destroyed, the tunnels cleared, and the enemy either dead or retreating. Marines advanced to secure the airfield, astonished by what had just occurred. One young Marine, 19 years old, had single-handedly neutralized 54 armed Japanese soldiers, cleared 12 reinforced pillboxes, navigated tunnel networks, and held off a counterattack that would have crushed an entire squad. The impossible had been accomplished, yet the world was not ready for the full story. Jackson's heroism was recognized by the Marine Corps almost immediately. His Medal of Honor would become a symbol of courage beyond imagination, but even medals could not capture the entirety of what had happened on that volcanic battlefield. The war moved on, battles raged across the Pacific, and Jackson, like many heroes, returned to a world that could scarcely comprehend the magnitude of what he had survived. The scars of combat, physical, mental, and emotional, remained long after the guns fell silent. For decades, the events on Peleliu were recounted in fragments, in official reports, and in whispers among those who had witnessed them firsthand. But there was more, something the public would never know, a secret buried deep within the folds of military history. Years after the war, documents surfaced indicating that Jackson had been involved in operations tied to a highly classified project at Guantanamo Bay. The government had deliberately suppressed details, controlling the narrative, obscuring the truth. The secrecy suggested that the skills, strategies, and extraordinary initiative demonstrated by Jackson on Peleliu were studied and perhaps applied in ways never disclosed to the public. The full extent of his involvement remained classified, a shadowy echo of the legendary feats he had accomplished as a 19-year-old Marine. Even without the classified details, Jackson's legacy was undeniable. Veterans, historians, and fellow Marines spoke of him with reverence, recalling the young man who had defied probability, who had moved with speed, precision, and unyielding courage across impossible terrain. Each pillbox he cleared, each tunnel he navigated, each enemy soldier he neutralized was a testament to his skill and determination. He had changed the course of a critical battle in the Pacific, giving the Marines access to the airfield and altering the momentum of the campaign on Peleliu. The battlefield may have healed over decades, but the story of his actions remained etched in the memory of those who knew and in the silent records of history waiting to be fully revealed. Jackson returned to civilian life bearing the invisible burdens of combat. He rarely spoke publicly about the details of Peleliu, carrying the memory of smoke, ash, and the faces of those he had faced into quiet decades. Yet the Medal of Honor he received was a constant reminder of a single truth. Courage under fire is not measured in numbers alone, but in the will to act when all odds are against you. 54 soldiers, 12 pillboxes, countless tunnels, each a testament to his refusal to die, to surrender, or to accept impossibility. The history books recorded the medal, but the real story, the tactical genius, the survival instincts, the sheer audacity, remained largely hidden from public view. The secret at Guantanamo Bay added another layer to the legend. It suggested that Jackson's experience, his ability to turn impossible odds into success, had been of interest to military planners long after the war. The government had preserved documents, reports, and evaluations that examined every decision he had made under fire, every movement across volcanic ridges, every tactical choice in the tunnels. While the public would never know the full extent of these materials, they hinted at the extraordinary influence one young Marine's courage could have beyond a single battle, extending into strategies, operations, and lessons that shaped the understanding of combat for decades to come. In the end, Arthur Jackson's story is a lesson in courage, ingenuity, and resilience. It is the story of a boy who faced death kneeling, rose against impossible odds, and became a force that changed the course of battle. It is the story of a Marine who refused to surrender to probability, to fear, or to overwhelming numbers. And it is the story of a man whose actions, both seen and unseen, left a mark on history that endures far beyond medals, battles, or classified files. Peleliu was only the beginning, a stage on which his courage was displayed for all who were present. The decades that followed, filled with secrecy, reflection, and quiet heroism, only deepened the legacy of one Marine who proved that a single person, armed with resolve, skill, and determination, could achieve what no one thought possible. As the sun set over Peleliu, casting long shadows across the volcanic ridges and shattered pillboxes, Jackson's story remained alive, not only in the official records or in whispers among veterans, but in the lessons it offered to anyone facing impossible odds. Courage, clarity, and an unyielding will can turn even the most hopeless situations into triumph.
1 man, 54 enemies, 7 minutes to live, and a legacy that no secret, no distance, and no passage of time could ever erase.